this lecture covers the cardiovascular system, ending with the blood vessel, and then a later video will discuss the lymphatic system. So remember, the cardiovascular system includes the heart, which pumps the blood, and this blood goes through the vessels. So this lecture will focus on the blood vessel. So the first thing we'll look at is function and structure of blood vessel, the arteries, capillaries, and veins, and then finally fetal circulation, how the blood vessels are different in the fetus in the mother's womb. So let's review the function of the blood vessel. So we've seen this before. You have three types of blood vessel: arteries that carry blood away from the heart, capillaries which do the exchange, anything going in or out of the blood, and veins that carry blood back towards the heart. Let's look at the structure of the blood vessel wall. In general, blood vessels have three layers. The tunica intima, which is made up of endothelium. So you'll notice that this is the innermost layer. So the lumen is the inside space where the blood flows through the vessel. So here is the tunica intima, right here. The tunica media, which is the middle layer, right here. And this is all muscle, and it's mostly elastic. It can stretch. And then finally, the tunica externa, which is the outer layer. And think about the function of all outer layers. Outer layers are protective. So the tunica externa is a lot of collagen, which is a tough fiber, which is very protective. And again, if you look at these names, you can tell intima, think inside. Externa, think exo, or outside. And then media from middle. Now there is one exception. The capillaries don't have all three layers. So if you find an artery or a vein, you'll see all three layers, but capillaries don't. So let's think about why. So I have a true or false question for you. Capillaries will have both the tunica intima layer and tunica media layer to allow for gas exchange. So this is actually false. The capillaries only have one layer, just the tunica intima layer. They don't have the media or the externa. And here's why. Think about the capillaries doing gas exchange, oxygen and carbon dioxide going through the capillary. So for instance, blood needs to deliver oxygen and pick up carbon dioxide. Now, can carbon dioxide and oxygen go through a really thick layer? For instance, a lot of muscle, which is the tunica media? No, it can't. In fact, remember, whenever you want to do exchange, it has to go through a single layer or a simple layer. So you might recall way back in our first couple weeks of class, we went through things like simple versus stratified. You guys remember simple, meaning one layer. And remember, simple, one layer is good for exchange. Stratified, many layers is good for protection. So remember, the goal of capillaries to exchange things like gases, so you want a simple layer. In fact, it's going to be squamous, which remember is the flat cell. That's the thinnest and the easiest to pass through. And remember, epithelium lines a body cavity, or on the outside. In this case, the body cavity is the blood vessel. So in this picture, you can see blood will actually flow through here where I'm going through. And then where the arrows are pointing at, that's your simple squamous epithelium, which is the capillary. All right. So let's look at the arteries in a little more detail. Remember, they carry blood away from the heart. A for arteries, A for away. So in this cartoon version here, you'll see this is where the heart's supposed to be. And this would be, for example, the aorta, leaving the left ventricle of the heart. So there's actually three types of arteries. The first type is the elastic artery, and that would be, for example, the aorta and the arteries that branch off of the aorta. They're very elastic, as the name says. So they withstand a lot of pressure because they can stretch a lot. And so your aorta would be a classic example of an elastic artery. Now, as you branch off the arteries into smaller and smaller pieces, the next type is the muscular artery. And these are made up of, like the name says, a lot of muscle. So the smooth muscle in these blood vessels will actually help move the blood through. So that's why these are muscular. And remember, blood vessel will have smooth muscle in the wall. And the last are the arterioles. The arterioles are the smallest of the arteries, I mean more branches. And these arterioles lead into the next step, which is the capillary. The goal of the arteriole is to help regulate the speed at which the blood will flow into the capillary. The capillaries is where you're going to do your exchange, so it's important to regulate how fast the blood goes into the capillaries for the exchange process. So again, 3 types. Elastics are the first ones coming out of the heart. They're going to be the strongest, the most stretchy, because they withstand a lot of force as the heart pumps the blood out. Next are the musculars, which have a lot of smooth muscle, which help move the blood along by contracting. And then last are the arterioles, which basically regulate the amount of blood flowing into the capillary. Next, you reach the capillaries, which is where the exchange occurs between the blood vessels and the tissue. So for example, at the capillaries, notice the blood vessels come in red, which you remember means it has oxygen. At the capillaries, what they'll do is they'll deliver the oxygen and then pick up the carbon dioxide. And the delivery of the oxygen, you see as the oxygen leaves the capillary, notice the color goes from red and starts to change from red to a kind of a duller red, almost purplish, and then to a blue. So by the time you come over here, you exchange the oxygen and pick up the carbon dioxide. Other things that you'll exchange at the capillary are things like your nutrients, like sugar, for example, or hormones when they get delivered to their final destination, like the thyroid hormone going to the thyroid gland. They'll all be delivered at the capillary. Specifically, if you notice, it's not just one capillary going across. Notice that from the arterioles, you branch out into several capillaries. And this is called the capillary bed. So that's the branching of the capillaries into this whole bed network. And the reason is that you actually want a lot of area for the exchange to occur. For example, let's use an analogy of like going to a checkout line at a grocery store. You don't want just one checkout line. That would be the equivalent of one capillary going through, because clearly you're going to get backed up and you can't do your checkouts as fast. Whereas at the grocery store, you notice they'll have multiple checkout lines, like 12, maybe 15. If they're all open, that means the checkouts can occur faster. So that's what's happening here. You have multiple capillaries, which is the bed, for more efficient exchange. So let's take a moment here and talk about a problem when your arteries get clogged. So you guys might have heard of arteriosclerosis. And this is an issue where the arterial walls get really thick. So, for example, this would be a healthy artery, a nice lumen on the inside. Remember that's the space in the middle that the blood can flow through. And then here's the arterial wall. Compared to here, notice the lumen is really, really small. And then all of this right here, this is all a buildup, like for instance, plaque, building up inside the arterial wall. And so the arterial wall is thickened. Of course, now the problem is the lumen is so small, it's hard for blood to pass through. And here's another image of a clogged artery. Again, the lumen on the inside and all of this white you can see build up, that's actually the plaque and the fatty tissue being built up. So a specific form of arteriosclerosis is called atherosclerosis. And this is specifically when the wall gets thick because of these lipid deposits or these fatty buildup called the plaques. And again, that's this showing right here in that nice white color, which we know we can identify with fat. So what causes atherosclerosis or arteriosclerosis? Risk factors include lifestyle. So we all are aware of, for instance, things like smoking, eating a lot of fatty foods, being extremely sedentary. So all of these, for instance, the food, the smoking, the sedentary lifestyle will lead to a buildup on the wall. But then also family history. So there is a genetic component sometimes of the atherosclerosis or these plaque buildups. So there could be a genetic component. So if you know you have a family history of it, if there's genetic cholesterol build that runs in your family, you definitely want to make sure that you have your lifestyle in order, so that way you don't have both your family history and lifestyle increasing the thickening of the wall. Of course, the effects can be really deadly. If you have the thickened wall, of course, the blood can't flow through. And if this happens in one of those coronary arteries, for example, right coronary artery or left coronary artery, remember, those arteries need to bring oxygenated blood to the heart muscle. If those get clogged, the blood can't go through those arteries. They can't make it to the heart muscle. Heart muscle receives no oxygen. Heart muscle dies. Heart can't pump. And this results in the heart attack, or remember the scientific term, myocardial infarction. Now, if the vessel is headed towards the head, we say it's a stroke. So if you block a blood vessel going towards the brain, we have a stroke or a cerebral vascular accident. We discussed that in the nervous system. All right. Our last type of blood vessel are the veins, and the veins will carry blood back towards the heart. So here you'll have smaller veins called venules that start coming together, and they merge together. Think about like maybe two freeways merging into one to form a bigger vessel called the vein. And then the vein ultimately makes its way back up to the heart. Remember, it goes into the right atrium. So let's talk a little bit about these veins and how they're different than arteries. So veins have low pressure in them. And the reason why is that blood gets all its pressure from the heart. So where your heart pumps is where you're going to have the highest blood pressure, because blood is basically ejected or spurting out of the heart. So right here at the aorta, you'll have the highest blood pressure. And as you go further and further away from the heart, the pressure is going to drop and drop and drop. An example would be, for instance, shooting water out of a water gun. Right where the water comes out of the gun, it'll have the highest pressure because that's where it was pumped out. But then as the water travels further and further from the gun, from the source, notice it's going to lose its pressure and drop. And that's the same thing with blood. So notice the track, high pressure in the arteries coming out of the heart, and then as you go down all the way to the capillary beds and then finally make it to the veins, the pressure is going to be really low simply because you're farther away from where the pressure started at the heart. The next feature is that the veins have really thin walls, and you might remember this looking at, for instance, when we did the heart dissection, the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava versus the aorta. Right? The aorta is an artery, it has a very thick wall, and I told you look for the thickest elastic wall, whereas veins will have really thin walls. And again, this relates to the low pressure. If there's not much pressure in the veins, you don't need as strong and thick of a wall to withstand that pressure. The last thing you'll find in veins are valves. And the valves are actually going to help with the blood flow. So think about this. Think about a vein that you have, for instance, in your foot, and that blood needs to get all the way back up to the heart. Now, it has a really tough job because there's low pressure, which means the blood's not moving that fast. And it also has to go against gravity. So the problem is that the blood might go up, but it might actually start falling backwards because of the low pressure and gravity. So that's where valves come in. Valves will actually help move the blood along the veins. Basically, valves, remember, from the heart, the main valve's job is to prevent backflow. So these valves basically keep moving the blood up the vein towards the heart. And it does so right here. You can actually see here is the valve. And so blood gets pushed up, and then the valve closes behind it, so that way blood can't flow back. And then it goes up to the next valve, and again that valve closes and again pushes it up. So that would be a nice normal vein. But I'm sure you guys have heard of varicose veins. Varicose veins, if you think about the symptom, right, you find it most often in people's legs, and you'll see kind of like this puddling or this pool, a little bumpy, and it'll look blue. So here's the problem with varicose veins. The valves don't work properly. They're leaky. And so the blood comes up, but then it falls back because the valves are slightly open. And then the blood will pool up here, causing these little bumps that you see. And because it's in the veins, it's deoxygenated, which means it's blue. So one of the reasons why people get varicose veins, you might notice it happens more in elderly people. That's because with time, these valves are maintained a lot by muscles, and with time, they just get weaker and weaker. The other thing is that if you have a more sedentary lifestyle, if you're not walking as much, again, these muscles will actually help move the blood up and also help the valves function better. So if you're not moving that much and walking and exercising, then your valves are more likely to be faulty. And then the other place you'll see varicose veins a lot is actually in people who have professions where they stand up a lot. Like, for instance, if you're a hairdresser or you're on your feet all the time. That's, again, just because these valves have to be working really hard all the time.